Good evening. My name is Tom Neenan. This year I'm serving as interim dean of the College of Arts and Sciences, where we are very proud that the Marcus Orr Center for the Humanities is housed. The Marcus Orr Center, as most of you know, has been in existence now for 26 years. And we are very proud that it not only ties together the faculty across the various parts of the or major units of College of Arts and Sciences, but across the university. It was conceived and continues to operate very effectively as a medium for conversations across disciplines within the university and as a bridge between the university and the community as we think about the issues that are relevant for our age. The topic this evening, I think, fits marvelously in there, and we're very pleased and honored that Robert Darnton is joining us here today and making a significant contribution to that mission as we think about books, publications, and their future, both electronically and in other ways. They are at the center for the past few centuries of what the humanities have been and have branched out across all other levels, all other areas of learning across society. So this is an apt topic today. As I said, we appreciate that you from the community have come here. We appreciate you coming out. We think we have a real treat for you tonight. I'm going to, having said that, I want to sit down after I've introduced the person who will say more about our speaker tonight, Aram Goodsouzian. You should know a little bit about Aram. Aram has served for the past few years as the director of the Marcus Orr Center for the Humanities and been very successful at that. He's a professor, and this year is serving as chair of the history department. He received his PhD in history from Purdue. His primary interests are American popular culture, African-American history, and 20th century American history. I don't want my introduction to go even longer, but it could easily, than Aram's will be, but it could easily go pretty long because Aram is a very prolific scholar of important work on his own, or in his own right. Several of the books are Down to the Crossroads, Civil Rights, Black Power, and the Meredith March Against Fear, King of the Court, Bill Russell and the Basketball Revolution, Sidney Poitier, Actor, Man, Icon, The Hurricane of 1938, and he's currently working on a book on the Meredith Project again that's coming out this February. So, Aram, will you say a little bit about the event?
Good evening. Thank you to Tom for that very flattering introduction. I didn't expect to be introduced myself. Tom is a former director of the Marcus Orr Center for the Humanities, as am I, as is Jonathan Judakin, the current chair, and Spence Wilson at Rhodes College. All three of us know the secret handshake. Welcome to tonight's lecture by Robert Darnton, Digitize and Democratize, Libraries, Books, and the Digital Future. We start by giving thanks to our co-sponsors here at the University of Memphis, the Helen Hardin Honors Program, the Phi Kappa Phi Honor Society, and the Department of English. Our events are further made possible by public service funds. And with this event in particular, we owe a huge debt to our partners at Rhodes College. Scott Newstock with the Pierce Shakespeare Endowment and the Phi Kappa Phi Beta Kappa Honor Society, and Jonathan Judakin, the Spence L. Wilson Chair in Humanities. It's worth noting, it's very important to note that this lecture is also part of the Communities in Conversation series at Rhodes College. And just as you can pick up a calendar of the events on the bookmark for the Marcus Orr Center for the Humanities, you can do the same for the Communities in Conversation series. They're both outstanding. Also, please note that the festivities will continue tomorrow morning with a free public symposium at Rhodes. Dr. Darnton will be commenting on a panel about, quote, the past and future of the book. It features two very notable scholars of Shakespeare, Dr. Lucas Erne of the University of Geneva and Dr. Michael Whitmore, the director of the Folger Shakespeare Library. It begins at 9 a.m. tomorrow morning in Blount Auditorium at Buckman Hall in Rhodes College. A few more things before proceeding on. First, in the unlikely event of an emergency, please note the emergency exits on each side and from where you entered. Second, if you have not done so, please shut off your cell phones and other electronic devices. Third, at the conclusion of tonight's presentation by Dr. Darnton, there's a handheld microphone here on the floor. Simply raise your hand and I'll come to you with the microphone if you'd like to ask him a question so that everybody can hear your question. And finally, after the Q&A period, Dr. Darnton will be signing books, 3 of which of his books are available for purchase right outside there in the lobby, and I'll be available to chat with guests as well. Tonight's event was conceived to focus our community's attention on the library, what has been described by one scholar as, quote, the heart of the university. We can say the same for our city's public libraries, that they're the heart of our intellectual life and a central hub for all of our citizens. When you decrease funding for a library, whether it's a public or a private institution, whether it's academic or a non-academic library, you weaken the very heart of your community, whether it's here at the university or in the city of Memphis. It's important to note in particular that here in our region, because our libraries collaborate with one another, because they share books and other resources, a problem at one of the libraries is a problem that affects us all. It diminishes the collective whole. When you cut one library's funds, you hurt an entire city. Our speaker tonight knows libraries from the inside out. You could say that his career was born in one. In the 1960s, in the library at Neuchâtel, Switzerland, he found a trove of archival material that no one had seen in two centuries. 50,000 letters about 18th century books. These are letters by authors, booksellers, publishers, printers, paper makers, smugglers. There's a whole world to explore. Over the next 14 summers, he read all 50,000 of those letters, which has provided the foundation for his two massive contributions to historical knowledge. First, he's an extraordinary historian of 18th century France, most famous perhaps for his great book, The Great Cat Massacre, and other episodes in French cultural history. Second, he's helped to create an entirely new discipline in history, the history of the book. This is a discipline that shows that the book is not just a way to convey ideas, but a force in history itself. He asks questions such as, how are books produced and sold? Who reads them? What are their effects? In his case, he used the book to answer critical questions about the origins of the French Revolution, seen perhaps most vividly in his book, The Forbidden Bestsellers of Pre-Revolutionary France. A longtime history professor at Princeton University, his honors include a MacArthur Prize Fellowship, National Book Critics Circle Award, election to the French Legion of Honor, and a National Humanities Medal, which was conferred by President Barack Obama in February of 2012. When he speaks on behalf of libraries, he speaks with immense intellectual authority. Since 2007, he served as the director of the Harvard University Library System, the largest university library in the world. And he has spearheaded the creation of the Digital Public Library of America, which we'll be hearing more about tonight. Echoing the title of his most recent publication, he makes, quote, the case for books, considering not only their historical past, but their role in the digital future. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Robert Darnton.
Well, thank you for that flattering introduction. It's wonderful to see a community in conversation, to see the university and Rhodes College collaborating on making conversations happen. I'm delighted to be here. It's my first day, believe it or not, ever in Memphis. But I've learned that the sun is always shining, the sky is blue, you've got puffy clouds, and the temperature remains stable at about 80 degrees. So it's a lovely occasion, and I'm delighted to be here. I'd like to begin with an observation that is not news to you, but I think it will provide a context for the argument I'm trying to make, namely that although there's a lot of loose talk about the death of the book and the obsolescence of the library, books and libraries are more important than ever as we advance into the digital future. And that future is, I think, extremely promising if only we can get it right. Now, it's not clear that we can get it right, because that's really what I'd like to discuss today. There are opposing forces, and someone's got to speak up for the public good. I'd like to, however, sort of back into that argument by saying a word about the history of libraries. And that will lead toward what is a new kind of library, the Digital Public Library of America. Now, the historical importance of libraries may seem obvious to you. If you take a tour of a typical American university, you will find the library usually right at the center of the campus. and it occupies a corresponding place at the heart of the university's intellectual life. I mean, the library pumps intellectual energy into all sectors of the university, including labs where scientists are downloading electronic articles without knowing that they come through the library. The library really is everywhere. It's the heart and soul of the university, and I would add, public libraries provide the same function within communities. Well, that may sound a little bit like a commercial, but let me explain what I mean. At Harvard, the university actually owes its name to its library. In 1638, one John Harvard, we know almost nothing about him except he was our first great benefactor. He gave this tiny little college, which had been founded only 2 years earlier, 400 books in his last will and testament, and that became suddenly the largest library in North America. So this tiny college named itself after John Harvard, and today, 375 years and 17 million volumes later, it's clear that the university's greatness has derived, above all, from the intellectual riches that were built up over many generations and stored in the largest university library in the world. Now, I'm beginning to lapse into something like institutional bragging. You know, that sometimes happens when librarians get together. They say, how many incunabula do you have? Or how many e-books do you have? Instead of lapsing into that sort of discourse, what I would like to do would be to ask a question. Shouldn't Harvard's library and those of other great research libraries scattered throughout the country be considered as a national asset? Shouldn't their intellectual wealth be shared? This is the homepage of the Digital Public Library of America, and I'll just let you have a look at it if you haven't seen it already, while I begin to say a little bit about the history of libraries, because you might think it's a trajectory that leads upwards to more and more communication of knowledge. In fact, that's not the case at all. It's a very uneven line as libraries developed over time. There is a downside to it, and I would just mention that because that's part of the point I'm trying to make. We need to struggle if we want to promote the public's access to knowledge. So if you take the famous Great Library of Alexandria, we don't know much about it, but it wasn't a library at all in the modern sense of the word. The public or ordinary readers couldn't go into it. There were a few scholars, it's true, but basically it was a great collection of, it was hoped, all of the books in the world designed to magnify the glory of the Ptolemaic dynasty. That's what it was all about. And other attempts to bring all of the books in the world together have had also a way of closing them off from the public. For example, there was a Chinese emperor called Qian Lung who in 1772 set out to create, in his eyes, the greatest library of the world. It would contain all the books in the world being Chinese, of course. And so he started sending out agents to confiscate books from his Chinese subjects. He got the books all together, and then he proceeded to have his librarians burn every book that was critical of the Qing dynasty and favorable to the Mings. So we had a great book burning. At least 2,320 books, it was estimated, were destroyed in order to build up this other library. I could give you other examples. For example, well, very briefly, in 1954, the Czechs tried to do the same thing. They actually went around confiscating books from all kinds of libraries if they caused offense according to a set of categories. Now, some of the categories are pretty obvious: no pornography, no fascism, but others are kind of strange. For example, no ruralism, no snobism. All of those books had to be purged from the libraries of Czechoslovakia after World War II, and in fact they got rid of 7,500 books. They disappeared from the repertory of books available in Czechoslovakia, and that was nothing compared to what Stalin did to books in the Soviet Union, especially during the Great Stalin Terror of 1938 to 39. He got rid of 24 million books. So what I'm saying is the history of libraries does have a dark side to it, and we shouldn't assume that libraries are always growing and more books are always becoming available to readers. But of course, there is a bright side to this dark story, and it does have to do with the democratization of knowledge, which we can do thanks to digitization. But first, I would like to let you ponder over this image while I begin to mention at least one of the problems. It's the problem that concerns the way libraries have walled themselves off from the general public. Of course, the great ancient universities of Europe performed a wonderful service to civilization by building up their libraries, but they kept them for the privileged few who could attend those universities. And those privileged few lived inside walls. The walls, they're still there today in Oxford and in Cambridge. I myself went to Oxford, and the walls would be typically 10 to 15 feet high with spikes at the top. That was to keep the public out, and sometimes to keep the students in. In my college, St. John's, you had to be in by 10 o'clock at night, and if you weren't, a huge gate slammed shut, and it was your problem to get back in if you could. Now, you couldn't really climb over a 10-foot wall with spikes at the top, but there were a few passageways which the dons at St. John's allowed more or less to function. This is one, and that's a picture of me a long time ago with a friend. He's hoisting me up into one of these passageways to get into the college between a row of revolving spikes on the bottom and strong spikes at the top. So what I'm saying is, and I'll show you various photographs of Oxford and its spikes, there was a way in which these great universities turned their backs on outsiders and kept them outside by all kinds of fortifications. This, for example, is a photograph of the Bodleian Library, the main university library. Lots of spikes in the background, crenellations, and I could go on and on. I will, just so you get the idea. It's showing you how the public was kept out while the privileged few were kept in. But what I want really to talk about are the invisible barriers to the knowledge stored in research libraries. So I'll flash pictures of all kinds of ways of keeping ordinary readers out, but what my real subject is the problems now of opening libraries up. And of course they began to open at the beginning of the era that we call the Age of Enlightenment. In 1692, for the first time, the Royal Library, the King's Library in Paris, was open to scholars. Somewhat later, in 1759, the British Museum, as it was then called, today the British Library, was opened to ordinary readers. In 1848, the Boston Public Library was founded. with a wonderful inscription, which I'll show later, over its main entrance, "Free to all." In 1911, the New York Public Library opened its doors, bringing together three great collections of wealthy billionaires or millionaires, and making them available to a public, the ordinary public, people who could walk in off the streets, maybe just off the boat from all kinds of ports in Europe, poor immigrants who wanted to read books in their native languages or wanted to get an education. The New York Public Library became a kind of university for the great masses of immigrants to New York. Well, there was, in other words, a process of creating public libraries, of opening up private research libraries that began to make knowledge available to ordinary people. But, of course, it was limited. Originally, you could say it was sort of a gleam in the eye of the founding fathers. At the origins of the American Republic, people like Thomas Jefferson thought that a republic depended upon the citizenry's access to knowledge. And as Jefferson put it, knowledge is the common property of all mankind. Sounds great. It was great as an idea, but in Jefferson's day, that idea could not actually be realized because what was the medium for spreading knowledge? The printing press. Now, at that time, we have lots of estimates about the rates of literacy. They varied a lot and so on, but basically, most people could not read, and of those who could read, most of them could not afford the price of books. So the printing press, back in 1776, was really not powerful enough to be the vehicle for realizing this Jeffersonian ideal of actually making knowledge the common property of all mankind. Today, however, we can do it. We can actually realize the dream, not just of Jefferson, but of John Adams, of Immanuel Kant, of Condorcet, of the great philosophers of the Enlightenment, who believed that progress depended upon the dissemination of knowledge. We can do it because we have the internet. We now have the technical capacity to realize something that was only a kind of utopian dream at the time of the founding of the American Republic. So we're at it. We're going to try to make this happen. And the larger context is what I would call a general opening up of access to knowledge. You've seen many, many examples of it. Just consider Wikipedia. Now, I know a lot of people have doubts about Wikipedia. There are some inaccuracies. Actually, now they do a lot of editing, and I think it's far superior to what it was originally. But Wikipedia now contains over 22 million articles. I mean, it's simply amazing, and you can get at them with a click of your computer. There are 77,000 active contributors to Wikipedia. Now, when the great encyclopédie of the French Enlightenment, the Bible of the Enlightenment, so to speak, edited by Diderot and d'Alembert, came into existence, it had 17 volumes of text and about 200 contributors. I mean, this was considered a miracle at that time, but think of the difference between that encyclopédie and Wikipedia. We are dealing, I think, now in an era of openness. That is a new ideal, and it is transforming the world of knowledge. That is, in principle, because we are living in what I hope will become a genuine republic of letters. That's a phrase also from the Enlightenment. It's a world in which there is no police force. There are no boundaries, neither national nor disciplinary. It's a world open to everyone. And so today we have open universities, open source software, open metadata, open access journals, and the beginning of an open information highway. But now I'm going to shift back to the darker side of the coin, if you like. There are problems in opening things up. So I'd like to begin by asking if any of you has any idea of what the average cost of a journal in chemistry is for 1 year's subscription. Do I see, are there any guesses out there? $4,000. $12,000. Oh, $12,000. I can cite you titles of chemical journals that do cost $12,000, but the average cost is $4,000. What was it in 1970? $33. Now, of course, inflation explains part of that, but only a small part of the increase. During the last 25 years, the cost of scholarly journals has increased by 4 times the rate of inflation as measured by the Consumer Price Index. And some journals now cost more than hundreds of monographs. The Journal of Comparative Neurology costs almost $30,000 a year. And 3 giant publishers, Elsevier, Wiley-Blackwell, and Springer, now publish 42% of all academic articles. And these giants make giant profits from them. Last year, Elsevier raked in £2 billion sterling and raked off a profit of 36% on that. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not actually arguing that the problem is greed. No, these publishers are doing their job. They are corporations that exist on the marketplace, and their leaders have responsibilities to shareholders. So you could say they're doing a terrific job, but the problem, of course, is the commercialization of access to knowledge, a way of closing access instead of opening it up. In the output of medical science, for example, doubles every 3 to 4 years. But medical journals are so expensive that fewer and fewer libraries can afford to buy them. So you've got an increase in, so to speak, the overall corpus of knowledge, but a decrease in access to knowledge. And that is basically the kind of problem that we all face. If you like, you could call it the logic of the bottom line, but I think there's a higher logic that deserves consideration. Namely, that the public should have access to knowledge in general, but especially to knowledge produced with public funds. Now, Congress acted on that principle in 2008 when it required that articles based on grants, federal grants, from the National Institutes of Health should be made available free of charge through an open access repository, PubMed Central. But lobbyists for the publishers set to work to gut that requirement by saying, well, yes, we'll make them available after an embargo of 12 months. And during that time, they could cream off what they wanted from the demand. Not content with that victory, the lobbyists tried to actually abolish this NIH mandate in something called the Research Works Act. I don't know if you remember that, but it caused an enormous storm of controversy. It was a bill introduced in Congress in November 2011, championed by Elsevier. And the bill was withdrawn 4 months later because activists within the world of the internet said this is outrageous. So it didn't succeed, but there is a constant danger of commercialization. In fact, you could say, maybe this is oversimplifying, that there are 2 basic forces at work, democratization versus commercialization. I'm forgetting to show you more spikes. But believe me, if you visit Oxford, just take a look at any college and you will see spikes or little shards of glass everywhere. Books are kept away from readers, and they are kept to the use of the privileged, namely the faculty and students of Oxford. So I could go on and on, but you get the point, I'm sure. Here's Virginia Woolf saying, open access to knowledge. We need to open things up, and that brings me to the rather delicate subject of Google. In 2004, Google set out to digitize all the books in the world, as they put it. And it was a magnificent dream. They came first to Harvard and said, we will digitize all of the books in your library for free, if you will let us have access to them for free. We said yes, but then Google wanted to digitize not just books in the public domain, and they digitized 850,000 of them, but books covered by copyright. At that point, we said, no, we have to respect copyright. Google, however, went on to other libraries, notably Michigan, Stanford, and California, and there they digitized everything they could get their hands on and built up a great database of digitized books. They were immediately sued by the Authors League and the Association of American Publishers for infringement of copyright. What do you do if you're a big corporation and you're getting sued? You go into a closed room and start negotiating with the enemy. So the plaintiffs and Google had secret negotiations which lasted for 3.5 years and came out at the end with something called the settlement. The settlement transformed what was originally a search service into a commercial library. So at the beginning, Google simply meant to, if you typed in a word or an idea you were looking for, to show you where that would occur in a book, and it would give you a few snippets showing where that actually happened, but limiting the text it produced to just a few sentences. That was enough, though, to count as an infringement of copyright, and therefore, when Google and the plaintiffs negotiated over how to make a deal, they transformed that search service into a library, a commercial library. And that meant that they were asking us, because there would be subscriptions purchased by libraries, they were asking us, the libraries, to buy access to the books that we had provided to them for free to digitize, and to buy this access at a price that would be set by Google without any oversight by the public. In fact, the public had no role in this whatsoever. It was all a matter of dividing a pie. Google would get 35% of the income, and the people who sued Google would get 65%. This was, frankly, a new kind of monopoly, a monopoly of access to information. But the settlement had to be approved by a court because it had been originally a suit. And the Federal District Court for the Southern District of New York said, this is indeed a monopoly. It violates the Sherman Antitrust Act. We will not accept it. So Google Book Search was dead, and it's still dead because it's clearly not legal. That doesn't mean that Google can't make use of its database. It's doing that, but it's not doing it by making it a library. It's, in effect, producing a retail service for certain publishers. Well, on October 1st, 2010, I invited a group of heads of libraries, heads of foundations, computer scientists to meet at Harvard and to discuss a possibility. The possibility was to create a Google type of library, that is a library that would combine all of the holdings of all of our research library in a huge system, but that would make them available free of charge to the entire public. It sounded extravagant, but after just about 30 minutes of discussing it, everyone there said, it's a good idea, we can make it happen. How? Well, we will create a coalition of foundations to provide the money. We will create a coalition of libraries to provide the books. And so, from October 2010, for the next 3 years, we set to work. We created a supervisory committee, a kind of headquarters located at the Berkman Center at Harvard. We invited people to debate possibilities all over the country. We held plenary meetings open to the public in San Francisco, in Chicago, and in Washington. We set up work groups that studied various aspects of this future library. What should be its content and scope? How would it be administered? How would it be financed? What about the legal problems involved? What kind of public should be anticipated? And what the technology would be. Very complicated questions that surrounded an idea which in itself was quite simple. How should we envisage the digital public library of America? Well, not as a kind of Google. In fact, you might think of it as kind of the equivalent digitally of the Library of Congress, but I think that's also misleading. Here is the entranceway to the Boston Public Library saying free to all. So that's the principle behind everything. And at our meetings, we had artists who were sketching the various ideas that were debated in these plenary sessions that I mentioned. So I've just tossed that up for you to look at while I try to explain how you might envisage this new kind of library. I think it would be, it's tempting, you know, to say, this will be the new Library of Alexandria. This will be the mother of all libraries, the great library of the future. But there's a danger of getting carried away by utopian rhetoric. And in fact, I think we've reached a stage where we must be practical, get our heads under the hood, so to speak. What we need to do is to create a new kind of system. So you should not imagine the Digital Public Library of America as some gigantic structure with a dome on top and a huge database on the bottom. It's not like that at all. In fact, it's what we call a distributed network. That is a system for linking and making interoperable in a user-friendly manner digitized collections that already exist in all of our research libraries and that are being developed all the time. So, of course, the Dpla will have digitizing projects of its own, but it will not become some kind of monolithic, centralized mega library or a digital version of the Library of Congress. So it actually does now exist. We launched it on April 18th, but April 18th was 3 days after the bombings in Boston, and we planned to launch the Dpla in a ceremony in the Boston Public Library just across the street from where the bombings occurred. Therefore, we had to cancel that ceremonial opening, but we went online on April 18th, and the Digital Public Library of America is now up and running. You might say, well, who authorized you people to do this? And the answer is no one. We were, if you like, a self-appointed group, and then after getting things up and running, we handed off the responsibility of keeping them running and expanding this original core to a not-for-profit corporation which has a board of directors and a budget and is operating like many not-for-profit corporations. The idea, though, is it should be outside the federal government. It should be free from political pressure. Even then, we were rather skeptical about what Congress could do in the first place, and some of us still feel even more skeptical today. So this was, if you like, a private initiative that was typical of many things in the United States, where foundations can provide the support and not-for-profit corporations can make them happen. It has a mission statement, which you see here. That is, it will be a distributed system. As you see, I'll let you read it instead of reading it to you. But what we hope is that the DPLA will be useful to a very broad public. It's not something for college professors in particular. It's aimed to serve ordinary people of all kinds, students from K to 12 to the PhD, especially public libraries, which will be provided with the cultural heritage from all of these great research libraries as a supplement to what they normally make available to their publics. We imagine it being used by people, old age people in retirement homes, or individual authors and researchers who are seeking information, or just readers who want to get deeper enjoyment out of literature. So it's aimed at a very broad and a very varied public, or publics in the plural. The DPLA will encourage local communities, especially around public libraries, to develop their own collections. In fact, we will send out what we call Scanabagos, sort of Winnebagos with scanners in the back, and librarians to small towns or sometimes city neighborhoods, and invite people to bring material they have in their trunks in their basement or their attics. It could be old photographs, correspondence, material of all kind about the life of their community. And we will help them get it digitized, to create the metadata, provide ways for preserving it, and integrate it into this national system. So you should think of the DPLA as not a top-down type organization, but one which is horizontal, trying to create links and to develop community spirit around public libraries, not just well, as I said, to deal with college professors. So we are actually doing that. This aggregating function, bringing things together, already exists in 32 states. And in general now, we have what we call hubs of two kinds: content hubs and service hubs. The service hubs will be where these Scanabagos will operate. They will do other things in bringing together and aggregating digitized collections throughout every state in the Union. The content hubs will be places which already have gigantic digital collections. So Harvard is one of them. We have hundreds of thousands, even millions of items that we are making available directly to the DPLA. The Smithsonian is another. There are quite a few of these content hubs that are now existing, and it's all going to be linked up in a system that will make it very easy for the ordinary user at one click to get to the document that he or she wants. This is a kind of schematic account of it all, and I won't go into the details, but you get the idea that the information will come from many different sources, and the technical infrastructure will make it really a dream to use, and people are already using it in this manner. We've had top technicians who began developing the infrastructure way back in October 2010. That summer, we organized an open competition. Anyone could try to come up with ideas for the technical design of the DPLA. 60 people just did it for the fun of it. A blue ribbon jury selected the 3 best ideas. They became incorporated in a prototype. It was evaluated, redesigned, evaluated, redesigned. And so when we went online on April 18th, it worked beautifully. We've been tweaking it ever since, but the technological infrastructure actually operates perfectly. And it's interoperable with Europeana. Now, most of you may not have heard of Europeana, but that's an attempt in Europe, financed by the European Union, to aggregate digital material from 27 European countries. It's just beginning, really, but the point is our infrastructure is designed to be interoperable with that of Europeana. So we're moving towards a world in which there will be internet connections or electronic connections among vast numbers of libraries everywhere. But first we have to make it happen in the United States. This is another schematic version of what goes into and comes out of the DPLA. I just would point out the API, that's the top of the 3 orange bars. That's where public libraries, individual collection builders, and others can attach tools and develop their own version of collections. And we are finding that there has been an enormous response to this, that people have all kinds of ideas of developing digital collections that they want to share with the rest of the country. If you look at the web page of the DPLA, you will see that there are lots of ways of doing searches. Of course, by author, by title, by subject matter, but also by timeline and by geography. People began playing with it. It's http://dp.la, Digital Public Library of America, dp.la. So when you go home, give it a try. Go look around in it and see what you can find. Well, a lot of people did that when the DPLA went online on April 18th. There were 1.5 million downloads of its home page. In the first week of its existence, the API was pinged at 3.5 requests per second. And we now have 4.5 million items contributed by 600 institutions. So what began as a really rather small core has expanded and expanded and will continue to expand, I think, over many generations. Well, it got off to a fast start, but it must face problems. And I will just mention a few of them and then stop, and you could ask questions about it or anything else that's on your mind. The technological infrastructure, I think, is solid. And although we are improving it from time to time, we haven't located any serious bugs. Our finances will take us through the next several years. So we have an adequate financing, but not forever. You can't expect foundations to finance something like this indefinitely. So we must develop a business plan of some kind, and we're looking at various opportunities to do this, but we are determined that the public will have access free of charge. We have to decide how ambitious to be in building up our collections. So we want to have videos and recordings and material in all kinds of formats, as well as books and manuscripts. But how fast can we go? What will the limits be? How will we actually design these collections? Should we enter into partnerships with the private sector, for example, maybe with commercial publishers, or perhaps we could create a tiered system in which for special kinds of access, such as printing on demand or something, people might be willing to pay. There are lots of legal issues, and they are the most difficult of all. Because, of course, the Dpla will respect copyright. Now, I'm sure all of you have read the Constitution. You know that in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 8, there is a provision for copyright which says that the copyright should exist, quote, for limited times and, quote, to promote the progress of science and the useful arts, end quote. Limited times. What were those limits? Well, the first Copyright Act of 1790 said 14 years, renewable once. What is copyright today? Probably most of you know. The lifetime of the author plus 70 years. That means that most books from the 20th century, well, most books in general, will be kept out of the public domain, covered by copyright for more than a century. And therefore, the Dpla, as things now stand in our copyright situation, cannot include most of the literature from the 20th century. All books published after 1964 are automatically covered by copyright, not available to the public. Most books after 1923 are also excluded from the public domain, and believe it or not, some going back to 1873 are still covered by copyright. Well, we think that this is excessive, and so what we want to do while respecting copyright law is to take advantage of fair use, as it's called in the Copyright Act of 1976. That's a long, complicated subject. I won't go into the details, but there are copyright lawyers all over the country, law professors, who are studying fair use. And there have been a series of trials which suggest that we can make some books available for some purposes without the permission of the copyright owners. But we have another plan that I think is more promising. It's something called the Authors Alliance. We would like authors to voluntarily give up the use of their copyrights to the Dpla. Now you might say that's naive. What author is going to want to do this? Well, most authors, I would argue, after the commercial viability of their books has been exhausted. You know, most books actually cease selling after a few weeks, believe it or not. Certainly most books no longer have a commercial life after a year or two. 5 years down the road, it's a very rare book that continues to sell. And that's fine if certain authors can still make money by selling books 5, 10, 15, 20 years after their publication. That's wonderful. But most authors won't. I mean, well, for example, I published a book in 1968. It's still in print. I make enough from its sales to take my wife out to dinner once every 2 years, if she pays for her share of the bill. What do authors really want? They want readers. After a certain point when they know they're not making any more money from their books, they would like their ideas to circulate. And so I think they will be willing to join an authors alliance and make their material available through the Digital Public Library of America. Well, I think that the future for the Dpla is really promising. We don't know exactly what it's going to be. We certainly can count on the fact that technology will be changing all the time, and so the general technological ecology will look different 5 years from now, certainly very different 20 years from now. But I think that the delights of the Dpla will have no limit. And I think that we actually will provide access to our common store of knowledge. The Dpla cannot make everything available at once, but it will open up endless vistas in this constantly evolving digital landscape, little by little, library by library, until, if you want to put it that way, we the people have come into the inheritance that was ours by right from the time the Republic was founded. Knowledge is the common property of all mankind. Well, that was true when Jefferson said it. Now we can make it true in practice. The launch of the Dpla on April 18th was a giant step in that direction, but it was only a beginning. We still have a lot of work to do. Thank you.
Please raise your hand. Please raise your hand if you'd like to ask a question.
I had one question in regards to works that were written, research works that were written, paid for by public monies, because I am aware of the, I don't know if you're aware of the suicide of Aaron Swartz, the hacker computer guy who had broken into the MIT computer servers and was downloading the research journals. And he was facing up to 40 years in prison, I believe, for that. And I don't know if that was just for the breaking and entry or for the theft of the journals. But I was wondering what the status of that law is in regards to questions like that.
Well, I'm sorry to say it's a very, very sad story because he committed suicide. This was a computer whiz kid. I forget how old he was, I think 22 or 23, who, like many wonderful computer engineers, thought all information should be made available free to everyone, whether or not it's covered by copyright. And he decided that he would break into in effect, a server at MIT that contained the database of JSTOR, which is a gigantic collection of journal articles. And he would just make them available free on the web, put them on the web. And he was caught, actually, and he literally broke into this area of MIT where it was stored, and charges were brought. He then lived in New York, and he killed himself before the court case took place. It was a very, very sad case. MIT did not want to press charges. The thing spun out of control, and I think it's created a terrible series of shock waves to these bright young computer engineers who believe in this future of openness, but they don't always understand that we live in a real world of costs and legal impediments to the free distribution of knowledge. I mean, nothing is free in the absolute sense. It costs money to produce a journal. It costs money to run a library. It costs a lot of money, I assure you, to run a library, about $162 million a year in the case of Harvard. It's very expensive. So that's what I meant when I said we have to be pragmatic. We want to harness the idealism, the can-do aspect of these computer engineers and to direct it in a way that is for the public good. But there is always a danger that it will get out of hand, and this is one of the saddest chapters in that respect.
Professor Darnton, thank you so much for a wonderful talk. Can you tell us a little bit more about your initiative at Harvard to create open access on the basis of Harvard faculty all signing on to open access? And can you also talk a little bit more about the ways in which that is spreading to other universities and what you see as the trajectory of that initiative towards open access of publishing in the academic sphere in terms of the kind of knowledge that we produce?
Yes, gladly. I mean, in the face of this staggering inflation in the cost of journals, we decided that it's not sustainable. We buy 892 journals from Elsevier alone. We spend $2 million a year just on Elsevier journals. We simply cannot go on, especially as they increase the price by 5 to 6% a year. So it truly is unsustainable. But aside from the cost of the journals, there's the principle of open access to knowledge. And I'm sure you're aware of the irony of it all, because we, the academics, do the research, we write the articles, we referee the articles, we serve on the editorial boards, and then we buy back the product of our own labor, which we do for free. We buy it back at ruinous prices that fill the pockets of these monopolistic publishers. I think that that's not the way things ought to be. So in the face of all of this, we had a debate at Harvard, and in February of 2008, this was a debate actually first in the Faculty of Arts and Sciences, the faculty voted unanimously to create an open access repository according to certain rules. And the rule was that every scholarly article produced by a member of the Harvard faculty would be deposited in a repository that we created. It would be made available free of charge to anyone within reach of the internet. Well, as you can imagine, this caused a certain amount of stir because there was a mandate that Harvard professors and postdocs, etc., were required to do this, but we wanted to respect their liberty. So there was an opt-out provision. And anyone who did not choose to deposit an article could automatically be free of this. But you'd have to click something on your computer to do so. The point is to have a resolution like this that had some teeth in it. It was a requirement. Of course, we couldn't force professors to comply. So we tried to persuade them, but all of us voted unanimously in favor of it in the first place. And the repository has grown and grown and grown. It's quite a hit. I mean, people all over the world consult these articles all the time. And it proved, I believe, that so-called green open access, that is, making knowledge available through databases that are created in universities and other research centers, should be made available free of charge to the public. Gold open access, as it's so called, those are open access journals that are published and made available free of charge to the rest of the world. But as I said, any journal has to meet expenses. So the way open access journals usually meet expenses, many of them are supported by professional associations and who pay the way, but many require so-called processing fees. So the author, thanks to a grant, maybe from the Institutes of Health, National NIH, or from a fund provided by the author's home university, pays a certain amount of money to the publisher. The publisher publishes the work, adds a little bit for surplus to deal with the continued existence of the publisher, and this journal is then, that issue of the journal, the article in it, is made free to the rest of the world. Now this may sound strange to some people. Why should you pay to be published? But the answer is it's far more beneficial to libraries, because libraries then don't have to pay these outrageous subscription prices. So what we're trying to do is to transform the economics of academic journal publishing in such a way that the overall costs go down and the public has access to it. Is that clear enough as a reply to your question?
I'm not an expert.
Oh, okay, sorry, I can't see you too well. But, I mean, the open access movement it's a complicated business, but it's really going places. This is actually happening. And I think that we can stop this excessive pricing of subscriptions to academic journals, and it will make a tremendous difference to people who are interested in getting access to knowledge.
The library here has joined something called Science Direct, and Springer through that allows you to download books as a kind of user for that, for certain titles, oftentimes in their kind of sections that cover very technical things. That's actually a godsend, because it would have been something you would have called in through a kind of lending library from one to the next. Can you comment on your idea of how that works effectively for libraries? It would seem to be very costly, but I don't have any idea.
I don't know the details of Springer's Access Direct. You say it concerns books. Springer is one of the big three that charges excessive prices for journals. Now, I don't, it could be that they are recycling material from the journals and making them available as books, but honestly, I don't know how that particular project works. Most of the publishers also publish books, but they certainly don't give them away free. In some cases, they have what they call hybrid journals, in which you have to pay for the subscription, but some of the articles in a particular number of the journal will be open access, and the publisher agrees to reduce the cost of that issue of the journal in proportion to the number of open access articles submitted to it. So Springer is big on hybrid journals, but when it comes to monographs, I'm sorry, I don't know what their particular project is.
We have time for 2 more questions.
Okay, I've published primarily in mathematics and computer journals, which may be a very different kettle of fish from the medical ones. But the journals I've published in have never objected to my giving anyone who asks me copies of my articles. They've never objected to me putting my own articles on my own website where people can find them. And presumably, if there are enough people like me out there who provided links to you, many articles would be findable that way. Is that a model that has any legs to it at all?
I think it is, and I welcome many journals which do require payments for subscriptions to them if the payments are reasonable. I mean, after all, academic journals, well, they began in the 17th century with the proceedings of the Royal Society, but they really developed in the 19th century as organs of professional societies, and many of them are still going strong and provide a wonderful service. So I'm not arguing that all subscription journals are bad. It's the excessively priced ones that I find objectionable, because they're killing us in libraries. I mean, you know, for one copy, 1 year subscription to the Journal of Comparative Neurology, you could buy 300 monographs. Now, in the case of mathematics, I think the mathematicians have led the way, actually, in open access publishing, some of them, and the physicists even more so. But if a particular like Mathematica charges reasonable prices, then I think that's a service to the world of learning, and it's just fine. But Tim Gears, as you know, led the petition against Elsevier, a mathematician, a great mathematician, who thought that Elsevier's prices were outrageous, and he started a petition which had 14,000 signatures within a few months of people who said they would not publish in Elsevier journals. They would not referee for Elsevier journals, and often they went off and founded open access journals of their own. But I don't want this to sound like a rant against Elsevier or any other publisher. As I said, they are intelligent people doing their job to make money for their shareholders. And I certainly don't mean to sound as though I think only open access publishing is possible. I mean, I'm all for openness, as I indicated, but there are many ways in which we can provide access to knowledge, and if it's by charging a reasonable fee, so much the better.
This will be our last question, but remember that Dr. Darnton will be available to chat with guests in the lobby afterwards.
My question pertains to a slide you had back there that illustrated the different repositories around the country that were feeding into the Dpla, and it's about the illustration of the metadata from those different collections all coming into the Dpla, because the ability of metadata to do its job of helping people find what they're looking for depends upon a consistent or close enough to a consistent format of data, and sometimes it also depends on a close enough to a consistent use of vocabularies. What challenges and solutions has the Dpla planners found towards dealing with not always consistent metadata from the different institutions?
It's a very great problem, because obviously if you look at catalog entries for the same work in different collections, often it's very different. The spelling of the author's name, even the title, and when you get into other languages and other alphabets, the problem becomes really fierce. So how is it solved? Well, that was really the main problem faced by our technological designers. I can't explain how they solved it. It has to do with a process called scrubbing. You can scrub data in such a way as to make it compatible, so that you arrive at standard metadata categories and that kind of thing. But precisely how they scrubbed, I'm sorry, I can't explain. But it was a crucial thing, and it won't always work, especially if you're dealing in Chinese or Arabic. It's extremely difficult to do. But we have found, actually, that so far our technological way of creating compatible metadata from diverse sources has actually done the job.
Please remember that tomorrow at 9 a.m. at Blount Auditorium at Rhodes College, our festivities continue with a panel on the past and future of the book. Please join me in thanking Dr. Darnton.